Council and PCC. I will therefore comment, but very briefly, on clause 49 and clause 65. Mr. Speaker, sir, clause 65 first. That is the redefinition of SMEs. Presently, the world is faced with daunting challenges and perpetual disruptions due to the prolonged ramifications of COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, rising inflationary pressures, and strained global supply chains. In such a particular context, government has made special efforts to come up with an expansionary budget to ensure a better future for everyone. That is, a future where no one is held back and no one is left behind. Small and medium enterprises, SMEs, form a vibrant pillar of the Mauritian economy. Despite the severe impact of the pandemic, the SME sector has remained a major engine of growth and continues to contribute to the resilience of the economy by responding to fast-changing conditions, even in times of the economic downturns and uncertainties. Presently, SMEs account for 44% of total employment, 35% of total value addition, and some 10% of total domestic exports. Through their flexible, innovative, dynamic, diversified, and competitive approaches, they allow the birth of unique breakthrough ideas and the development of unconventional work methods. According to the United Nations, 600 million jobs will be needed by year 2030, Mr. Speaker, sir. 600 million jobs by 2030 to absorb the growing global workforce. This makes SME development a high priority for many governments around the world. Here, government has been actively involved in tearing down barriers to enable small and medium enterprises to thrive. My ministry is ensuring that a host of supportive and enabling entrepreneurial policies and programs are in place. One brilliant decision we took back in 2017 was the establishment of SME Mauritius Limited. Since its creation, SME Mauritius has established itself as an agile, service-oriented support institution focused on its mandate of consultancy, advisory, and training. Not only is it delivering effectively on its core objectives and its mandate, but is eager to set higher standards and improve constantly. In order to improve resilience of SMEs in the face of the challenges posed by COVID-19, SME Mauritius responded with customized schemes to cover more than 35 components relating mostly to functional areas of SMEs. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is noteworthy to underline that over the last 2 challenging years, some 1,500 SMEs have benefited from the customized schemes of SME Mauritius. The joint turnover of these beneficiaries is around 5.1 billion rupees, and they jointly employ some 7,000 people. Our policy for SMEs is crafted around the 10-year master plan, which we started implementing back in 2017. 5 years down the road, new uncertainties and risks, new challenges, and realities have emerged. At the same time, new opportunities which could further foster SME growth, development, and competitiveness are unfolding. In this context, a mid-term review of the 10-year master plan is being carried out. Budget 2022-2023 contains a host of attractive measures that creates the essential conditions to reignite the SME sector. One of the measures is a revisiting of the definition of SMEs. Different countries apply different criteria to define an SME. These countries use a mix of sales turnover, value of asset employed, and number of employees of an SME for its categorization. In Mauritius, we have retained a simple benchmark, that is sales turnover per annum. It is a straightforward and easily identifiable as method. Presently, an SME has a turnover not exceeding 50 million rupees. Mr. Speaker, sir, with passage of time, inflation and rising costs of products and services have led sales turnover of SMEs to increase in terms of value, but not necessarily in terms of volume. Consequently, these entities run the risk of being deregistered as an SME, since their financial statements will disclose an increase in sales turnover. Therefore, the definition of SMEs is being reviewed as follows. A micro-enterprise with turnover up to 10 million rupees, small enterprise from a turnover above 10 million rupees and up to 30 million rupees, and finally, a medium enterprise from a turnover above 30 million rupees and up to 100 million rupees. All enterprises with turnover of up to 100 million rupees will henceforth be categorized as SMEs instead of the current 50 million rupees. These adjustments bring the missing middle into the mainstream of institutional support. This amendment will effectively enable some 142,000 enterprises to benefit from improved access to government support programs. They can also be eligible to finance, which is being made available through the DBM and the IFCM. As importantly, the redefinition aligns with regional metrics and opens up opportunities for local and regional value chain integration, partnerships, joint ventures, and mergers. This important measure will now pave the way for accelerated growth in this sector. With more enterprises now qualifying as SMEs, government has increased the amount allocated for SME support scheme from 40 million rupees to 60 million rupees. Additionally, this amendment also creates a new category of entities, that is mid-market enterprises. These are defined as having sales turnover of more than 100 million rupees up to 250 million rupees. Mr. Speaker, sir, I must say that the SME registration unit operating under the aegis of my ministry is all geared up for the registration of new SMEs and mid-market enterprises. In fact, registration will be completed within 7 working days upon submission of a complete application. The officers at the registration unit are also available for counseling. Since its creation in January 2018 and up to 30th June 2022, the SME registration unit has issued a total of 17,488 registration certificates as SMEs and provided business and information counseling to some 23,000 persons. This is Indeed commendable, Mr. Speaker, sir. To continue supporting SMEs in these difficult times, the DBM will extend the SME interest-free loan scheme and the COVID-19 special support scheme up to June 2023. An amount of 5 billion rupees will be allocated to support SMEs, mid-market enterprises, and entrepreneurs through the DBM with an accelerated processing. On its part, the Mauritius Investment Company is setting up a venture capital fund of some 5 billion targeting SMEs and MMEs. It is a known fact that for long, lack of finance has been cited as an obstacle inhibiting creation of SMEs as well as growth. We are fully supportive of the 4 measures announced to provide SMEs with adequate financial resources to support their growth. Import substitution and food security are undeniably among the high priorities of government at this particular juncture. Alongside these priorities, we also want SMEs to exploit new business opportunities, create new jobs, stimulate innovation, and contribute to the economic prosperity of the country. We are encouraging more SMEs to engage in food and food processing. Mr. Speaker, sir, I will now move on to clause 49. Allow me to comment on the amendments being made to the National Productivity and Competitiveness Act, NPCC Act. I welcome these amendments, which are bringing further improvement in the daily operations of the NPCC. Honorable members will recall that the NPCC is a body corporate operating under the aegis of my ministry. It has as objective to stimulate and generate productivity, quality consciousness, and drive the productivity and quality movement in all sectors of the economy. Indeed, it plays a vital role in raising national output and achieving sustained growth and international competitiveness. It goes without saying that to be able to undertake the above roles effectively, the NPCC should be flexible in its functioning. Under the current legislation, all documents which are executed by or on behalf of the Council must be signed by the chairperson or vice chairperson and the executive director. This causes an inconvenience in the day-to-day operations, particularly in instances where the chairperson or vice chairperson are not readily available, leading to undue delays. The imported amendments of Section 19 will therefore facilitate the smooth running of the organization insofar as there is more leeway given to management for checks of an amount not exceeding 50,000 rupees to be signed by the executive director and any other employee appointed by the council for that purpose. Mr. Speaker, sir, adversity has not weakened us. Instead, it has strengthened our steel, deepened our bonds, and brought us closer together as one united people. Mauritius' economic growth and future is dependent on our collective efforts to rebuild and reposition ourselves. The budget reflects our shared vision of a fair and just society. With the implementation of the budget 2022-2023, we carry the hope of a stronger economy, and we look forward to a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
You finish your speech. Thank you. The Finance Bill is amending no fewer than 82 pieces of legislation in a 213 pages of document. 213-page document. That's an absolute record. It's only last night that we received a 70-page long of explanatory memorandum. The object of the bill, as per the explanatory memorandum, is to provide for the implementation of measures announced in the budget and for matters connected, consequential, and incidental thereto. As is always the case every year when the finance bill is actually introduced to the National Assembly, some measures announced in the budget are omitted. Some measures which had not been announced in the budget find their way in the finance bill, and most measures announced in the budget speech are set out in greater detail. I say it is always the case, and it is perfectly normal for the Minister of Finance to take into consideration the criticisms and the suggestions made by various honourable members during their intervention in the budget. In the limited time imparted to me, it is of course impossible for me to cover all the provisions of the finance bill, and I will limit my intervention to a selected few provisions. One provision which was most uploaded and welcomed by MPs on both sides of the House was a decision in paragraph 486 of the budget to give, and I speak, to provide a direct monthly income allowance of 1,000 rupees to those earning a gross income of up to 50,000 rupees. And the Honourable Minister of Finance mentioned that this allowance would be paid to some 350,000 employees and registered self-employed individuals. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that today many employees and self-employed individuals have not been able to benefit from this monthly income allowance of 1,000 rupees. And I asked a PQ last week as to the number of applications received by the MRA for such income allowance, and the actual number of beneficiaries who obtained their monthly allowance. Unfortunately, up to now, the Honourable Minister of Finance has not answered this PQ. On 1st of July 2022, the Mauritius Revenue Authorities issued two press communiques inviting self-employed individuals and employees to register with the MRA to get the payment of 1,000 rupees. Now, the only eligibility criteria for this income allowance, which was announced in the budget, is that the employee or self-employed should have a gross income of less than 50,000 rupees. However, when the MRA issued its communique, it changed the eligibility criteria. Employees, for example, were no longer eligible if their employer was not compliant with his obligation under the Social Contribution and Social Benefit Act. Now, this is most unfair for a worker. He is penalized because his employer has not complied with his obligation under the Act through no fault of his. And the Act already provides for sanctions against employers who are not compliant. So there's absolutely no justification to penalize an employee just because his employer has not been compliant with the Act. As far as self-employed are concerned, the MRA communique provided that only a self-employed who is an individual, be above the age of 16, below the age of 65, who has registered with the MRA as at 7th June 2022. So only self-employed who were registered with the MRA as at 7th June 2022 are eligible for that monthly 1,000 rupees. Now, honourable members would recall, during the COVID pandemic, the MRA had already given an allowance to self-employed under the Self-Employed Assistance Scheme. There was also a one-off bonus given to all these self-employed. So the MRA already have a list of all these self-employed. So why ask them to register again? In any event, why could a person now, after the 7th of June, not become a self-employed? BCE has just closed down. If employees of BCE, as the Honorable Nakchedi is one of them, if he decides to become self-employed, assuming that he earns less than 50,000 rupees, why can't he benefit from this 1,000 rupees allowance? If a person now reaches the age of 16 after June 2022, and now is entitled to work and becomes a self-employed, why can't that self-employed not benefit from the monthly allowance of 1,000 rupees? So what is the rationale? Why have two categories of self-employed individuals, one prior to June 20, prior to the budget speech, and one after the budget speech? Now, it is understood that all these self-employed will have to pay their social contribution as a precondition to get this monthly allowance, and I don't think that this is an issue. But what is most shocking? What is most shocking about this eligibility criteria is that the MRA, as far back as 1st July 2022, has already come up with them. And it is totally, utterly illegal. Under what provision of the law has the MRA taken it upon himself to determine who is eligible to that allowance? There's absolutely no provision in the law, as the law currently stands, telling you that a self-employed, if he was not registered, is not entitled to the 1,000 monthly benefit. There is no regulation. In fact, it is only now, it is only today, after a month, that in this finance bill, the Social Contribution and Social Benefit Act is being amended at page 117 of the bill to provide for payment of income allowance and to provide the eligibility criteria for individuals, self-employed, and employees to benefit from this income allowance. Yet that income allowance has already been paid. That income allowance has already been refused to certain people. And I really don't understand what's wrong with this government. Why can't they do things the proper way, under the provisions of the law? Why do they attribute themselves powers and act in contempt of law? Why such arbitrariness? If the Honourable Minister of Finance really wants to help employees and self-employed, then I will urge him at committee stage to come with a necessary amendment to allow all employees, all self-employed of this country earning no more than 50,000 rupees to get this monthly allowance of 1,000 rupees. All 350,000 of them, because the money has already been voted. Please disburse. Another amendment which is being proposed in this bill to the Social Contribution and Social Benefit Act, which again attracted considerable attention, is the payment of retirement benefits to pensioners who have attained the age of 65. It was announced at page 461, paragraph 461 of the budget speech, that an additional amount of 1,000 rupees will be paid to them. According to the second schedule of the Social Contribution and Social Benefit Act, which is being amended, this will be given effect to. This second schedule is going to be subject to further amendments as circulated by the Honourable Minister of Finance, and I'll come to that later on. But what has caused confusion in the mind of the public is the publication of a press article where there was certain allegation from supposedly some authorized source on the Minister of Finance that there was some typing mistake in the second schedule. Because everybody reading the finance bill thought that as from 1st July 2023, all pensioners who are above 65 years old will be getting an additional 4,500 rupees in addition to their existing pension, which is 10,000 rupees right now. So that has caused a lot of commotion, and I'm sure that this is the reason why the Honourable Minister of Finance is coming with the proposed amendment he will move at committee stage. But may I remind honourable members that the Social Contribution and Social Benefit Act, which was voted in 2021, actually provides as at today, before the proposed amendment, in section 18, and I quote, subject to section 19, every person other than a person referred to section 21 shall at retirement age be entitled to a retirement benefit. It's already in the law. As from retirement age, they are entitled to retirement benefit. Retirement age means 65 and above. Retirement benefit is, and I quote, the social benefit up to the amount specified in the second schedule under Part 2 or Part 3. And if we turn to the second schedule, it already provides an amount of monthly retirement benefit of 4,500 rupees. It's already in the law. It's already there in the Act. Now, Section 43, subsection 2 of the Act provides that this Part 2 of the legislation will come into operation on 1st July 2023. So what the Finance Bill was doing in the second schedule was nothing more, nothing less than repeating what is already the law. That as from 1st July 2023, retirees above 65-year-old will be given retirement benefit up to 4,500 rupees per month. So I wanted to clarify this. Because if we turn to the estimate, Mr. Speaker, sir, the estimate that we just voted last month, we will see under item 27-210, we can read CSG benefit, social benefit, 2020-2023, this fiscal year, a budget amount of 2.2 billion rupees. This is the amount which is going to cater for the 1,000 rupees which will be payable to people above 65. So this is for this year. But then in the estimates, for next fiscal year, this estimate jumps to 10.1 billion rupees. And then for 24-25, it is 10.5 billion rupees. So it's already budgeted that as from next year, from 2.2 billion rupees, government is already planning to disburse 10 billion rupees to retirees above 65. And this should not come as a surprise, because when we turn to the same estimates at page 484, this time we're dealing with revenue collection from social contribution, the amount of money which the government has collected under Contribution Sociale Généralisée. Already, for last year, they have already collected 5.2 billion rupees. For this fiscal year, they intend to collect 8.6 billion rupees, and for the next income year, it would be 10 billion rupees. So the mathematics is there. They will take 10 billion rupees from workers and give 10 billion rupees to retirees above the age of 65. So I don't know what is this game about, trying to cause confusion in the mind of people that, next year, if the economy is okay, we will give you money. There's nothing about economy. You've already budgeted for it. It's already there. You have to pay. And may I remind this side of the House that it was their electoral promise that people will be paid, retirees will be paid for 13,500 rupees as pension. Retirees means those who benefit from pension as from 60, not 65 years. Pension payable when they come to power, not 4 years, 5 years after they come to power. And most importantly, they never said to the population that workers will have to pay a new tax, Contribution Sociale Généralisée, to fund that additional retirement benefits. With your permission, I would now like to turn to a subject which I have to confess I don't master at all. And this relates to the proposed amendments to the Gambling Regulatory Authority Act, which was alluded to by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Now, these measures were not announced in the budget, was not there in the budget speech, but was alluded to in the annex to the budget. Like everyone in Mauritius, I like horses. And when I was a kid, my father used to take the whole family regularly to Champ de Mars to watch horse racing, in particular the classic, Ducesse, Maiden, Coupe d'Eau. It was a family outing, an entertainment, very much part of our national folklore. Champ de Mars is located in my constituency, and many families in my constituency attend horse racing every week. Some even go every day to the training session to watch in the early morning horses train. They used to speak passionately about horse racing. Many of them earn a living out of horse racing, be it as a stable boy, palefrenier, food hawkers, or even bookmakers. But what this government has done to horse racing in this country is unforgivable. I'm not going to go into the reason why they did it, what grudge they may hold against the Mauritius Turf Club, MTC Sports and Leisure Limited, or its former president. Suffice it to say that after horse racing in Mauritius has been organized by the MTC, which is a non-profit organization, for 210 years, this government has decided to terminate the lease that it held in Champ de Mars and given a license to a newly formed company, the People's Turf PLC, which has absolutely no track record in organizing horse racing anywhere in the world. And the finance bill today, to a large extent, is ratifying what has already been done. For example, the State Lands Act at page 122 of the bill is being amended to allow the minister to vest the control and maintenance of Champ de Mars in the Côte d'Or International Racecourse and Entertainment Complex Limited, a company fully owned and controlled by the government. And no rent and fees shall be paid by this Côte d'Or company. What an irony. What an irony for a party who once had as its main campaign theme at the general election, combating Nation Zougadère. Today in power, this same government, through this Côte d'Or company, has now become a direct participant in the Zougadère culture. Yes, but Côte d'Or is being, the law is being amended, state law, to give the power.
Comment on the amendment.
Yes, I'm commenting. I'm not agreeable that the government now is getting...
Leave apart the policy of
that is the amendment.
Government. Leave apart. Come to the
but
amendment.
that was not spoken in the budget speech. It's only now that we have it in the finance bill.
Don't discuss with me. Discuss with the chamber.
So the Prime Minister is amending the State Land Act, but he has already rescinded the lease. That Mauritius Turf Club had over Champ de Mars, and they did so without paying a single cent as compensation, despite the investment made by the MTC over the years, despite the infrastructure bill, despite the monitoring system implemented, despite all the improvement made to the racing track of Champ de Mars. The Gambling Regulatory Act, the Gambling Regulatory Act, is being amended to give more powers to the horse racing division when it comes to licensing horse racing organizers, jockeys, and even horse owners. A notable amendment is to the requirement for licensees now to be fit and proper person. But what is odd is the proposed wording in the proposed amendment to section 30, subsection 2 of the Act. It is at page 49 of the bill, and it reads as follows. No horse racing organizer license shall be issued unless B, any of the applicants, directors, managers, officers, or any other person having a direct or indirect interest in the applicant is a fit and proper person. I read this section several times because I was not sure that I was reading it properly. But the plain wording of this section is that no horse racing organizer's license will be issued unless any of its directors, managers, officers, etc., is a fit and proper person. Now, this section does not require all the directors, managers, officers, shareholders to be fit and proper person. They only require any. So, in other words, the shareholders and directors of the horse racing organizers can be not fit and proper person as long as any one of them is a fit and proper person. So I really hope that this is not the intended consequence of this amendment, and I will invite the Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister of Finance, to double-check it with the drafting team. Because we're talking about big money here. Big money. According to a report published by Ernst & Young, entitled Economic Impact Assessment of the Mauritian Horse Racing Industry in 2018, the horse racing industry generated 6.2 billion rupees in GDP in 2018. The horse racing industry employed 2,170 people directly and indirectly, and generated some 679 million rupees in government revenue every year. Big, lucrative business. And today, GOA has given, because this is what this amendment gives the horse racing division the power to license horse racing organizers, and GOA has used this power to give a horse racing license to a company owned by a person who not only will be organizing horse racing, but who is also a licensed bookmaker and a licensed owner.
Honourable Member, bear with me. You're going too far. Comment on the amendment proposed. Comment on that. Bring it nearer. You are talking of the policy, what the GOA is trying to do, what government is. The amendment.
With you, Mr. Speaker, but what I'm saying here is what everybody knows. Les mêmes propriétaires, les mêmes bookmakers, les mêmes organisateurs, même qui existent.
But this kind of, you know.
And he is the one who financed this party.
This kind of comments are controversial, and so you should not be indulged in all this. Continue.
Yes. I'm sorry, but this is what it is. This is what it is. The last amendment, well, the last thing I'd like to comment upon is an amendment to the Civil Status Muslim Family Council Regulation 2005, which is at page 164 of the bill. There are also related amendments to the Social Aid Regulation of 1984 at page 162 of the bill, and amendment to the National Pensions Act. This proposed amendment relates to a provision announced in the budget, which I have to say triggered passionate debate by some honourable members on both sides of the House. Let me recall what the Honourable Minister of Finance said at paragraph 457 of the budget speech. And I quote, "We are extending the basic widow pension to Muslim widows through tardy registration of religious marriage before the Muslim Family Council." Unfortunately, this proposed amendment has resulted in comments on the social media and from various persons living in a different era. Allow me briefly to remind honourable members what was the issue. Between 82 and 87, Muslim women were allowed to marry religiously under the Muslim personal law. Then in 1987, the law was repealed and the religious marriage was no longer recognized. So there was a case entered by Mr. Biwa before the Supreme Court, and then all the way to the Privy Council. By the time the case reached the Privy Council on the constitutionality of that amendment, the government amended the law to introduce the Muslim Family Council, which was given the power to register marriages after December 1990. So prior to November 87, all the nikah, religious marriage, were registered. After December 1990, all the marriages were registered with the Muslim Family Council. But there was this gap between November 87 and December 90. We're talking about 3 years. We're talking about very few registered nikahs. And most of the people, the spouses, most of them anyway are either dead or above 60. So in any event, they already are getting the retired pension benefit. So honorable members, during the debate, thought that this government was going to rectify this alleged injustice and recognize marriages, with religious marriages between 87 and 1990. Unfortunately, when we look at the proposed amendment in the finance bill, that is not the case. What the amendment proposes is that those religious marriages which were celebrated before 87 or after 1990, who have not been for a reason or another registered with the Muslim Family Council, in these cases, the spouse is given up to December 2022 to now register that marriage, that nikah, that religious marriage with the Muslim Family Council. But for those who married between November 87 and December 1990, there's still nothing, there's still no avenue, there's still no registration. So I wanted that to be clearly stated in the light of all the passionate debate that we have. But when the Honourable Minister of Finance presents his finance bill, he comes up with a new measure that was not announced in the budget, that was not in the annex, that has never been discussed inside this House or outside the House, and it's going to have far-reaching consequences on spouses who have performed nikah. I'm talking about the proposed amendment to the Social Aid Regulation 1984, which is at page 164 of the bill. Today, there's absolutely no difference between a widow who has religiously married or who has civilly married. The law recognizes both, and both have the same right. When their spouse passes away, they are entitled to the same benefit, the same social allowance. But now what this government is doing, when it comes to surviving spouse allowance, Section 18 of the Social Aid Regulation 84 is being amended to read as follows. Where the applicant is one of the surviving spouses of a deceased person, the Permanent Secretary will pay to her a surviving spouse allowance, the amount of which shall, depending on the number of surviving female spouses, be divided in equal proportion to the rate of the widow's basic pension. So now, a widow who has religiously married will not have the same right as a widow who is civilly married. A widow who is civilly married will get the full allowance, full social allowance. But a widow who is religiously married, depending on whether his spouse had 2 wives or 3 wives, she will no longer get the same. And yet, when the husband was alive, she was treated like a full-fledged wife with all rights. being all maintenance, all properly catered for. And after the husband passed away, now he is no longer one person, he becomes quarter of a person, half of a widow. So this is extremely discriminatory. And I hope I'm not reading the law properly, because this provision, social aid regulation, falls under the Ministry of Social Security. And I'm very glad that Honorable Jiwado Yao is on the speaker's list. And I'm eagerly waiting for her to explain to all these widows the rationale of reducing the widow's allowance at a time of high inflation and increased cost of living. Because the Honorable Minister of Finance did not have the courage to state why he is depriving Muslim widows who have previously been married, as permitted by law, to the full surviving spouse allowance. The finance bill is being debated today at a time where the rating agency Moody's has downgraded Mauritius to Baa3. And despite the amendment to the Bank of Mauritius Act, it is with great regret that there is not yet a word in this finance bill about amending the Bank of Mauritius Act to comply with the recommendation of Moody's and IMF. It's not too late. I'm urging the Honourable Minister of Finance to do the sensible thing at committee stage and amend the Bank of Mauritius Act to reassure Moody's, IMF, and above all the lenders. We should not underestimate the gravity of the situation. And it is nothing short of childishness for both the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Mauritius yesterday to issue communiques to self-congratulate themselves for this downgrading. Thank you.
Honourable Ducan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for giving me the opportunity to intervene on the finance bill. And as we are all aware, it is part of the principle of natural consequences that now that the budget 2022-2023 presented by my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Finance, has been warmly welcomed by the population at large, the measures announced have now to be implemented. Et cela doit impérativement passer par les amendements à certaines législations existantes afin d'activer la mise en œuvre. Aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président, je me contenterai d'être bref et donc je ne vais qu'aborder les trois aspects du Finance Bill qui ont trait à l'éducation. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me first take the amendment proposed at the Education Act. Indeed, the Finance Bill makes provision for an amendment to this Act with regard to the introduction of a new scholarship scheme on the economic side. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, sir, that at paragraphs 245 and 246 of the budget speech, it was stated that government would introduce the Sir Anirudh Jagannath National Scholarship Scheme. A scholarship would be awarded to the most meritorious boy and girl on the economic side. Mr. Speaker, sir, the government scholarship scheme, also known as the laureate scheme, provides for 69 scholarships, including one MCB Foundation scholarship annually. Under the Sir Anirudh Jagannath National Scholarship Scheme, 2 additional scholarships will now be offered for the 2 laureates on the economic side to study for an undergraduate degree, either overseas or locally, and for a maximum of duration of 4 years. The scheme, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a means to pay tribute to the late Sir Anirudh Jagannath. Indeed, the Mauritian population as one recognizes Sir Anirudh Jagannath as the father of the Mauritian economic miracle. Certainly, he had been the driving force behind the economic transformation of Mauritius, and, Mr. Speaker, sir, Sir Anirudh Jagannath had always considered education are the bedrock for social equity and inclusiveness, as well as the leverage par excellence for economic progress. It thus befits his memory that we should attribute to the lead boy and girl on the economic side a full scholarship to enable them to engage in further studies. And I'm fully confident that the scheme will further encourage students to excel in their studies at HSC and beyond. After all, they will forever be motivated to honor the person after whom their scholarship is named, and the awardees would be able to come back and put the acquired knowledge and experience to the service of the country. Nothing would honor the spirit of the late Sir Nehru Jagannath more. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Education Act is being amended in the first instance to include a new section, 33C, with the existing section 33C being renumbered as section 33D. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me now justify the second important amendment. The House will recall again that at paragraph 257 of the budget speech, reference was made to the construction of a new Ayush hospital at Côte d'Or. This was in line with honouring the announcement made by the Honourable Prime Minister at the groundbreaking ceremony of the World Health Organization Global Centre for Traditional Medicine in India. Mr. Speaker, sir, this requires some upstream work and a travail méticuleux en amont has to be undertaken. Illustratively, a hospital, especially Ayush hospital, needs practitioners and specialists in the 6 Indian systems of medicine, namely Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy, all of which are commonly called Ayush. Hence, the Finance Bill proposes major amendments to the Ayurvedic and other Traditional Medicine Act, particularly with regard to the terminology. Thus, there is an amendment in the definition of the traditional medicine, and the words homeopathy and Ayurvedic are being replaced by the words Ayurvedic, Ayush. The other amendment pertains to the deletion of the term practitioner and practitioners and replacing them by the words general practitioners and specialists. Mr. Speaker, sir, one good thing about Mauritius is its openness to new ideas, new ways of doing things, taking to and adapting to them seamlessly. The natural empathy that has led to the acceptance of several traditional techniques and remedies transmitted from generation to generation. One such sector, which is very popular in Mauritius, is the field of Ayurveda, and the other 5 Indian systems of medicine prevalent and practiced in India and some other neighboring Asian countries. As the House is no doubt aware, the concept of Ayush was introduced in the mainstream medical field to strengthen the public health services through the revitalizing of local health traditions. This concept helped in utilizing the untapped Ayush therapeutics, the principles for the management of community health problems at different levels, including the workforce. It is interesting to note that the recent global pandemic brought to the fore the need to find solutions without harming the environment. While the medical sector was battling the disease and faced the pressure of finding a cure or a vaccine, attention also partly focused on natural cures provided by Ayush practices as a means of self-protection. We'll recall the YouTube channels that were rampant with Ayush techniques to maintain a balanced life, including mental well-being when faced with the distress of lockdown. To this end, and to promote the local sectors of operation, government is promoting the use of Ayush by setting up a Center of Excellence for Ayush in Côte d'Or. We want to ensure our population has access to as many techniques and modes of treatment as provided to ensure its healthy existence. And this goes through a formal recognition to Ayush studies. To this end, my ministry gave its blessing to a bilateral agreement between the University of Mauritius and the Central Council for Research in Ayurveda from India in 2019. As a consequence of this fruitful collaboration, the University of Mauritius has been hosting an academic chair in Ayurveda medicine since November 2021. Mr. Speaker, sir, we want to ensure that our population fully benefits from Ayush. It is noteworthy that the Mahatma Gandhi Institute is already delivering a certificate course in Ayurveda and Yoga. Similarly, along with the Center of Excellence in Ayush, the University of Mauritius will be offering undergraduate and postgraduate courses in the field of Ayush. One such program is a postgraduate certificate in Ayurveda Panchakarma for Ayurveda graduates in collaboration with the university's Center for Innovative and Lifelong Learning. As you may be aware, the Panchakarma is a unique method of cleansing the body, and it includes preventive, curative, and promotive actions against various diseases. The University of Mauritius will follow all the required procedures, and the course will be offered with approval of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, as well as the Higher Education Commission. Mr. Speaker, sir, because the conceptual realm of Ayush is relatively new for us in Mauritius, allow me to delve a bit deeper into some of the benefits it will bring. Mr. Speaker, sir, many aspects of Ayush must be seen as opportunities for local higher education sector, but also for the research sector. Mauritius has a number of endemic flora and fauna which have high medicinal properties. Our researchers have done so much already to showcase our rich surroundings. Research in moringa, on the black tea, and their beneficial impact on human body are just two such areas. We must not underestimate the rich marine biodiversity that we have. These research areas and such others, Mr. Speaker, sir, would allow for the creation of new opportunities for the business sector as well. Finally, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me conclude by saying that the amendment proposed by the Financial Bill to the Statutory Bodies Pensions Fund Act. This amendment aims to include all secondary schools that receive grants under the Private Secondary Education Authority, that is, all private grant-aided secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, sir, the guiding principles that government has adopted with regard to private grant-aided secondary school sector has been ensuring the prevalence of equity and parity with the state sector, be it in terms of facilities provided to students or benefits accruing to the staff. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Finance Bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, is firstly amending the Statutory Bodies Pension Funds Act to clarify the first point, namely that the term secondary school here implies to those, as I've said, private grant-aided secondary school. Secondly, staff who joined the private secondary schools prior to the 1st January 2013 contribute to the private secondary school staff pension scheme, which is a defined benefit pension scheme governed by the Private Pension Schemes Act 2012. This scheme falls within the purview of the Financial Services Commission and is managed by SICOM. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, sir, staff of the private secondary schools who joined service as from the 1st January 2013 adhere to the Public Pensions Defined Contribution Pension Scheme, which is governed by the Statutory Bodies Pensions Funds Act. The legislative amendment proposed is primarily serving to align employees who joined the sector prior to the 1st January 2013 with those who joined the sector post 1st January 2013, such that they will all be governed under the Statutory Bodies Pension Funds Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me explain the rationale behind this. The private defined benefit pension scheme, by its very nature of being a closed fund, will over time have a reduced number of active members, while the numbers of pensioners will increase. As matters stand now, the PSS pension scheme is able to meet its pensions obligations over some 10 years, but has an actuarial deficit. For recall, the actuarial deficit takes into consideration the future benefits payable to existing and future beneficiaries. So it is not a cash deficit, but an actuarial deficit. Accordingly, by proposing that the private secondary schools be listed under the Statutory Bodies Pension Funds Act, we are ensuring that all members of the profession are treated equally. In fact, members will be better off with additional benefits, including new provisions recommended in PRB reports, and this while the acquired rights of members under the existing PSS pension scheme are being preserved. With this change, the actuarial deficit in the defined benefit pension scheme will be addressed. Mr. Speaker, sir, you will have noted that I have centered my intervention around 3 amendments proposed in the Finance Bill related to my ministry, as I stated earlier. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, with this, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you have the floor, I'll ask the Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Honorable Boulay, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Finance Bill is an omnibus legislation, and this is a mammoth bill, as has been stated by previous orators, especially Honorable Xavier Duval, leader of the opposition. It's a mammoth bill with 84 clauses and 13 schedules. And I have to register our complaint, and very much like what has been stated by Honorable Xavier Duval, I'm yet also to understand why the memorandum was circulated only on the threshold of the debate. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill is being introduced against a backdrop of a global economy which is edging towards a recession, against a backdrop of cost of living which will go up with further depreciation of the rupee and high treason on the domestic front. The latest, of course, is the downgrading of Mauritius by Moody's credit ratings. We are hanging by a hair's breadth, a notch above junk status and on the edge of the cliff. As we say, take the IMF prescription, otherwise go the Sri Lankan way. I hope our economy will not be on a free fall. But there's a price, of course, to pay for economic mismanagement. The regime should not get away, and it is responsible for the devastating impact on commercial banks, and through no fault of theirs, and now de facto below investment grades. Beware of disinvestment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the devils are not in the details, but on the wall of the regime with bold characters. They are, of course, unintended, deliberate, and intended consequences of the legislation. I hardly notice any policy measure, and many clauses deal with administrative tightening measures when there should have been consequential amendments. Some of the clauses, unfortunately, are tailor-made to enable winners like Mr. Lishim to take hold. Notwithstanding that his business escaped tight scrutiny, he is now the lord of Champ de Mars, state land, till or if ever he moves to Côte d'Or. Glory to the political war chest of the centrist. Mr. Speaker, with or without those constantly replenish the war chest of the centrist, the countdown has started, and it's game over for Prime Minister. Let me, after these opening remarks, come to specific clauses. The amendment to the Animal Welfare Act. Yes, they make things tidy, and Section 36 of the Animal Welfare tightens penalties, but enforcement remains the crux. In Section 41, after Part 5, new parts added, namely 5A, to ensure that breeders of animals for competition, pure breed or leisure have a breeder's permit issued by an officer in charge of the Department of Veterinary Services. But it is easier said than done. Are the breeders registered? Most of them are not, and they have the habits of saying they keep these animals or as pets. Animals cannot be bred in a limited, confined perimeter. It's being done, and there are provisions for offenses. I pray for enforcement. The MSO certainly remains a real eyesore. And I was told that the Minister of Agro-Industry did make a side visit to Abercrombie, a surprise visit, I was told, and I'm sure he was shocked, appalled, and flabbergasted to take stock of cruelty inflicted upon the dogs. They say that strong dogs were making a meal of weak dogs, and that was the reality. My first prayer, which is yet to be answered, is neutering of stray animals, and a campaign for proper catching should be the last, and as a last resort, disposal of animals. Vicious campaign has been waged against Mauritius, considered by many as a destination of cruelty to animals. I know of tourists, especially from UK, who have adopted stray dogs and become part of the family. Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of nonviolence, advocated this policy towards animals, protection of the sacred cow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Finance Bill does not address the reform required to make the Bank of Mauritius fiercely independent. As I say, no one can ignore all the recommendations of the 2022 IMF Article 4 consultation mission. The Minister has promised that the Bank of Mauritius will no longer be the ATM of government. It will be decoupled from the MIC, and used funds will be returned to the Bank of Mauritius. The Minister of Finance, in a reply to a PQ asked by Honorable Ramphal, promised redress and highlight the independence of the Bank of Mauritius. The amendment to the Banking Act for approval of a license to the applicant will be void if terms and conditions are not clearly spelled out. As may be determined, is neither here nor there. Uncertainty will open the door for the likes of Ketan Somaya, the Sukon, and the Sobrino. We paid a heavy price by looking at Sobrino in the eyes. King Kong Ketan Somaya, jailed in UK for multi-million fraud. And the banking license to the free operators were issued when the MSM was in power. We say no to shades of grey and yes to transparency. Mr. Speaker, let me now come to the pension scheme and civil service family protection scheme and their intended consequences. Now, I thought I was the one who was targeted, but then I was told that since I make a contribution of 4% of the wages which I'm entitled to, it's going to target those who make a contribution of 2% of their wages. And even then, it's discriminatory. I hope the minister will take corrective measure, because this is not only discriminatory, but it is anti-constitutional. Mr. Speaker, the law may be an ass, or is an ass, but it cannot deprive a citizen of a return on his contribution. I recall that the regime of Sanaru Jagannath wanted to compulsorily acquire the residence of Kishore Diyapal Singh because he was a dissident MP. And if it were not for Sir Sat Kambulel, the then regime would have gone ahead with it. The petty matter was discussed in the Council of Ministers. If the Honorable Minister wants to review pension, and if the review is part of a balancing act of risk and rewards, at least he has a responsibility to tell the public. Let me come to the pension schedule for year 2023 or 2024. This has been well ventilated that it will be implemented in June 2023. There is a confusion, though. I don't know whether the confusion was deliberately triggered in the light of an article which appeared in a daily. Is it linked to the outcome of the case entered by petitioner Dial to contest the seat of the Prime Minister in constituency number 8? I hope that they will not find excuses to reschedule full pension permit to those who are 65 years old or those who are 65 years old, and that the schedule payment is made in due time as promised. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was, as I said, spelled out loud and clear by Prime Minister and Minister of Finance that monthly pension payment of 13,500 rupees would be effected as from July 2023. With constant depreciation of the rupee exacerbated by downgrading of credit ratings to a notch above junk status, the outcome will be light featherweight pension scheme. And to prepare for a graceful retirement, state employees are bound to contribute to a pension scheme. In Clause 31, there is provision in Section 27DB to increase the contribution from which they would be entitled to from 30,000 to 50,000 rupees, the maximum allowable deduction in respect of contribution made by taxpayer to a personal pension scheme for the provision of a pension for himself. But for God's sake, I expect the minister to come clean and spell out very clearly commitment given in respect of pension of payments which should be effected in July 2023. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, with an aging workforce, we are already in the doldrum. Contribution for one eligible pensioner will be drawn from a workforce of 2.4 persons. It is a scheme which will run out if fundamentals are not addressed. I hope we will not be an IOU nation. Let me now turn to clauses relating to agricultural sector. Clause 26 is being amended to empower Food Agricultural Research Extension Unit to do what its objectives are. Emphasis on research work in the non-sugar sector. But again, it's like bursting an open door with a butt from the head of a ram. Agricultural sector and agro-industry, I would ask the Minister, unfortunately he's not here, where are the findings of the latest report of the opportunities in the non-sugar sector? As to self-sufficiency staple commodities like potatoes, onions, I would say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it remains a forlorn dream under this government. The Minister of Agriculture of Agro-Industry should define policies to prevent encroachment on prime agricultural land. And there's an urgent call for clear demarcation line on land use and planning. Land under forestry is a bare minimum. Forestry is a good carbon dioxide cleanser, but there's a call for reforestation. And if we have to reach and meet our commitments given by the Minister of Environment on mitigation and adaptation target by 2035, Our biomass framework is yet to be subject of wide discussion with stakeholders, and the price should be indexed on heavy fuel oil. Mr. Deputy Speaker, only the price of bagasse has been determined, but still on the low side. I hope justice will be done to the planters. Clause 39, the Mauritius Agricultural Marketing Act amended. I ask myself, what is the purpose when the Object of Agricultural Marketing Board is an importer and buyer of last resort? There is a call to revisit the objectives of AMB to make it more responsible to consumers, wholesale buyers, and sellers. Let me come to the Mauritius Cane Industry Authority, which is being amended. I'm glad that the Mauritius Cane Industry Authority has spared the sugar syndicate and has not ripped off its membership from the International Sugar Organization. You may recall I made a strong plea during my intervention in the debates on the budget not to disrupt a system which is delivering. As we say, never repair if it's not broken. And there is a sacrosanct relationship, and it gives a marketing leverage to the Mauritius Sugar Syndicate. Clause 26B of the Mauritius Cane Industry Authority, in Section 24, to exempt producers and sellers using small tonnage of cane for production of cane juice for direct consumption from requiring the approval of the Minister of Agro-Industry. The ultimate beneficiaries are the miller planters who have a cluster with value addition, and they will use a sizable amount of the cane juice to be processed at their refineries. There will be an impact on the tonnage of sugar production. It's a choice, but the interests of small planters also have to be safeguarded. By deleting V and O, there is no obligation then on big planters to send a specific volume of tonnage of sugarcane to the mill. How big is the small tonnage of sugarcane to be earmarked for cane juice? This is yet to be spelled out, and I expect the Minister to inform the House. Now, I grant you, Minister, it is an administrative burden. There is a niche market to capture, and our sugarcane juice rum, of course, is much sought after. As you say, it toast to the spirit of the planters, but fair and reasonable price to small planters who will send the cane juice to the bottlers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Sugar Industry Efficiency Act is inevitable, as the Minister did not even have an iota of oversight on the Sugar Investment Trust, which has become unworthy under this government. Time for amending. The amendments make the Minister the master of the trust, and I expect he will not exercise undue pressure, but will allow the trust to deliver. Oversight, yes, but no stronghold. A vicious campaign was waged to provoke the departure of the CEO of SIT. He was wrongly accused of providing information to the opposition on the financial irregularities in relation to Water Park. He was unfairly accused of providing information to the opposition, and yet he had to put the SIT, and yet, he was the one who started to bring reform to make the SIT more workable and more responsive to the needs of its members. Unfortunately, the board has been operating without the CEO since the end of June, and the SIT has been taken over by one board member, allegedly representative of small planters, and it has a stronghold over the 5 elected members. I hope the Minister acts diligently and do not repeat the mistake made over the appointment of 2 members on the board of the Sugar Syndicate. They are not even representative of the Federation or Association of Sugarcane Planters. The planters who are members of the Federation feel aggrieved over the nomination of 2 non-members on the board of the Sugar Syndicate. The board of the SIT will be newly constituted, and may I remind the Minister, any departure from sound management, that is accountability and transparency, will blow in his face. Today, their site is a losing concern, and I expect it to come with a restructured plan to make a U-turn and to be profitable trust and eventually pay dividends. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me now come to Sugar Insurance Fund, C50A, clause 50B, clause 50C. Now, normally all these amendments are being revised after an actuarial exercise has been carried out, following representation by Association of Planters. This is the due process. By amending Section 2I of the Sugar Insurance Fund Act, in definition of normal years, by deleting the word 8 crop years and replacing it by 5 crop years, planters stand to lose. The crop is insured on the average of the 3 best years out of 8 years, which give them a better insurable tonnage on average. The Minister needs to find time and interface with the planters community to address the long outstanding issue. Let me now move from cane field to horse racing. The changes to the horse racing related section will further increase the interference of the Gaming Regulatory Authority Board in the matters of horse racing organization. I'm referring to the amendment F and G, which correspond to section 30 and 31 in the GRA Act. Why does the Gaming Regulatory Board concern itself, and the question has been asked, with horse racing matters when there is a horse racing organizer? Amendment H, relating to section 33, fees payable by the gambling operators to the horse racing organizer. Once again, the board is determined, and the way it's acting, the board is determined on killing an industry that provides a living to so many people. Over 10,000 people live from racing directly or indirectly. Was the horse racing division under the GRA board? And if it is so, and as it is, the horse racing division is under the GRA board, therefore, the GRA is acting as judge and party in horse racing matters. There is no clarity on the number of horse racing organizers and what are the criteria for a horse racing organizer to be awarded a license. Has there been a public call to invite those willing to apply for a horse racing organizer license? As we say, there's only one winner, and it's Mr. Lisson. Is there a commitment to evaluate the application?
Honorable, it's not proper to take the name of somebody who's not in the parliament. You withdraw it. I think it's quite fair.
Thank you very much. I'm stating fact. Thank you very much. Now, let me come to laboratories. Why source out other laboratories for blood sampling? The minister will have to tell us. And can the minister provide which countries, the logistic that will be involved, and the cost, the duration to receive the results? What will happen to Quantity Lab, which carry out those tests? Mr. Deputy Speaker, following the case won by a gentleman, I won't drop the name, HT, regarding the operation of limited payout machines, will he be allowed to operate? Say, I hope so, because he has won his case. The ruling was in his favor, and I expect that he will be allowed to operate. After seeing seals affixed to its gambling machine, the HT Investment Company Limited, as I say, won the case before the Supreme Court. Now, the judgment was pronounced by the senior punitive judge and Judge Benjamin Marie Joseph. Now, but unfortunately, there's only one limited machine operator, namely SMS Parias Limited, and it obtained its license in May 2018. So there's been a court ruling, a ruling that has gone in favor of this gentleman. I hope that justice will be made and he will be entitled, certainly, to operate the gambling machines. Now, the Gambling Regulatory Authority Act amended the Gambling Regulatory Authority Act, and therefore the horse racing organizer means a public limited company set up with the object of organizing horse races in Mauritius. In Section 2, by deleting the definition of the horse racing organizer and replacing it by the following definition, horse racing organizer means the holder of a horse racing license. The amendment number A, bracket 3, the lottery implies the regulator will regulate promotional lotteries being conducted online via the internet. However, does the promotional lottery amount to internet betting? Is internet betting being allowed? These are relevant questions that need to be answered, and it seems that everything is lopsided in favor of the gentleman whom I mentioned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, till date, we have to remind the House that the jury issued a tender to appoint a management company to set up the rules governing internet betting activities. Of course, we have to know what is the status of this tender and who was appointed. Let me conclude by referring to the Medical Council Act being amended in relation to registration of those who have graduated or are going to graduate from the University of Mauritius and would be entitled to temporary registration. Now, then they will have full registration. But let me make an appeal to the Minister to see to it that there is a differential treatment, and that should be extended or given to Mauritian doctors. And for those foreigners who are here working in hospitals, but who have a full registration, may I appeal to the Minister that there should be on a limited registration, as is currently being done in many countries in Ireland and UK. The Pharmacy Act, yes, we welcome the amendment being brought, but there are lessons to be learned and drawn from allocation of contracts. I'm not going to go into the high-performance saga in respect of quality, potency, and price of drugs purchased. In the past, we used to have a manufacturing plant, which used to manufacture drugs. And I'm sure some of us would recall that the drugs manufactured were of poor quality. Forget about bioassay, forget about the relevant equipment which should have been available, forget about samples which should have been assessed elsewhere. But you know, I recall there was an MP who brought a glass of water, purchased one of those drugs, and it was supposed to be a soluble drug, drop it into the glass of water, but it never dissolved. So my appeal to the Minister is to take all necessary precautions, to err on the principle of caution. It's all right to bring amendments to appropriate legislation, but at the end of the day, we have to deliver. If we want to be a brand name, and if we want to be a destination of repute, and if ever there is room for export of drugs, we cannot be termed as laggards. Either we are professionally, we bring in those who have the acumen to do the job, because at the end of the day, visibility and tangibility matters. I hope the Minister will respond to some of the questions I have put, and I'm sure that the finance bill, though many of the clauses in the bill are for administrative purposes, but there are some issues which have been raised, of fundamental issues, in relation to the right of an individual of a Mauritian born men or women who are equal before the law, but there cannot be treatment which go against this equality. Before the law, we're all equal, and I sincerely hope that in relation to the widows who married under the Family Council law, certainly rights and obligation will be complied with. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that we are all equal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you for giving the floor to address the House tonight.